Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is Tora and Patricia, and you're listening to Outvice Insights, a podcast by freelance talent marketplace Outvice. Here we discuss trending topics within business, technology, and the future of work. Today, we're speaking about the rise of the freelance economy and what it means for your business with tech innovator and gig economy guru Paul Estes. Paul is the author of the book Gig Mindset. He provides insights to over 100,000 readers in his weekly LinkedIn newsletters and has articles published in Fast Company, TechCrunch, and Forbes. Thanks for joining us, Paul. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me.
How is the weather there? You're speaking to us from the US. Where exactly?
Well, we're live in Seattle, Washington, right over by the Microsoft campus.
Okay, wonderful. And how are you today, Patricia? Thanks for joining.
Thank you. I'm very good. So it's actually sunny and very nice here in Barcelona. So, Paul, how about we start off with you telling us a bit about your journey from a full-time employee to the freelance advocate that you are today?
Yeah, well, I've been in big tech for about 20 years. And about 4 years ago, I had an experience where I hired a freelancer, and it was the first time that I ever clicked a button and found a human on the other end of the world that could help me. And so that really made me rethink how I worked and how I engaged. And at the time, I was at the company and we were going through budget cuts. And so we were being asked to do more with less money. And I started experimenting with freelancers to do some of our content work and other things, and signed Microsoft's first freelance platform agreement with Upwork, and rolled out a program so that other people across the company could engage with freelancers. And so I haven't stopped. In fact, this morning I published my 160th newsletter that was done by a gentleman named Tim, who's in Ghana, Africa, and he's been with me for over 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Paul. Can you explain a bit who are freelancers today? And is there a bit of a misconception that people might have about freelancing?
Well, I think there's a big misconception. There's sort of three things to think about when you think about freelancing. I'll do a plug for my podcast, Work on Demand, where I just interviewed a woman who did a TED Talk, and she's a career coach. And what she's trying to educate everyone on is that everyone is in the gig economy. Even if you're a full-time worker, the chances of you having a job that lasts more than a couple of years is declining. And so more and more people are, even in full-time situations, having short-term jobs at various companies. We're also seeing the gig economy come to things like doctors, lawyers, CPAs, and high-skilled professional careers. If you look at sort of telemedicine, if you look at what's happening with Intuit and CPAs being inside the product. So it's a lot more than just Uber. And the third one is the more traditional way we think of online freelancers in the knowledge workspace, especially, and I'm talking in the B2B side, not the business to consumer side. We see $13.4 billion of platform revenue, gross revenue this year. And that just came out from Staffing Industry Associates. So whether you're in a full-time job, whether you're a high-skilled worker, or whether you're a knowledge worker, getting started on one of the platforms, we're seeing the growth of the gig economy or the growth of freelancing everywhere we turn.
True. That's very true, Paul. So the freelance revolution, how is it affecting companies out there? You've just mentioned this case with Microsoft a few years ago, but what's the situation right now?
Yeah, I feel like it really exploded during the pandemic.
I think the number one thing that happened during the pandemic is we all realized that remote work was possible. And
Exactly.
I can remember when I was advocating for working with freelancers, that I was always told, no, they need to be able to, any consultant or any independent worker that we're working with has to be able to come to the office and we have to see them. And partly that was because people hadn't experienced a different way. And so change is hard. And there needed to be an event that forced everyone to change. And so now working remotely is what I'm going to do today, is fairly normal. And I think some places are experimenting with hybrid work, and there's a raging debate on the social platforms about, whether people are going to come back to the office or not. And I think it's a very personalized decision. But the pandemic definitely, in the knowledge workspace, if you could work remotely and do your job, science, the studies in the science say that you were more productive.
Mm. Yeah. But so you mentioned the pandemic driving the freelance revolution a bit. Is there something else? I mean, remote work, of course, but is there something else that's driving the freelance revolution? And other than the pandemic, why is that happening now?
Well, I also think you have a generational shift in the workforce. I mean, I'm the forgotten generation, Generation X, and so most of my generation, or if I even look at my father's generation, um, they didn't work remotely. They were very much command and control in the way they worked. The tools and the cultures that existed worked in that command and control way. I mean, remember, Slack, is only a handful of years old. And so the technology that's enabling this way of work is just coming to broad scale adoption. And then you have a bunch of digital natives who say, look, I've always worked or always had a cell phone. I've always had the internet. I've always, done asynchronous communication. That's their default. And so when you have that, those next generations coming into the workforce who that's their default way of operating on top of a technology set that's enabling that work, on top of a culture that says, hey, remote work is okay now. It's a perfect storm for adopting these new ways of working with freelancers or working with independent talent all around the world.
Right. Technology with this new generational change obviously help to speed up that trend. What about quiet quitting? It's a trend that we have seen recently, and it's probably happening more in the US than here in Europe. But how does it relate to the gig economy?
I think there was an article, and I don't remember who wrote it. So I apologize if someone's out there who coined this phrase. But they said, quiet quitting is employees acting their wage, right? There was this culture that happened, I think, before the pandemic where everyone was working nights and weekends and hustling and, you know, taking things like family, their mental health, physical health, their personal time and sacrificing it because they thought they were climbing a ladder and getting more money. And I think what's happening now is that people aren't quite quitting or aren't quitting as much as saying, this is what the job description is. This is what you're paying me to do. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm no longer going to give you my nights and weekends. I'm no longer going to miss family commitments and things that are important to me in order to try to, grasp onto some promotion or next pay level. And so I think it's just a normalization of um, the way people work. And I think you said something very insightful. It's more in the US than it is
Yeah.
in Europe. Because I think people in Europe, at least my understanding, didn't make those choices. They appreciated holiday, they appreciated family time or personal time well more than we did here in the US.
Yeah, probably.
So quiet quitting then, does it relate to the gig economy after people quit? Do they go to freelancing? Is that what's happening as well?
Yeah, we've seen a tremendous growth in small businesses, especially small businesses of one or two, right? And so I think there are people that are reevaluating what they do for work, where they do their work, and how they do their work. And so no longer is it necessary for everyone to have a job and to get in, leave early in the morning, sit in traffic. When you remove those constraints and say, hey, work can be done anywhere, it leaves a lot of options for people. And so I do think more people are becoming independent workers. And choosing less hours and sort of balancing out how much money they need to sustain their lives versus how much time they want to put into work.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. So you mentioned a couple of reasons as to why someone would want to be a freelancer. But what about instead of a full-time employee? Because, I mean, I guess you do lose quite a few benefits from being a full-time employee.
Here in the U.S., it's definitely unique in that our healthcare is tied to our jobs, and I always wonder if they decoupled healthcare from your jobs, how many people would actually leave the companies that they work for. I think it would be a significant amount. I think people are finding what works for them and their families. I think there are some people that are now relying on one spouse's healthcare to cover the family, while another person takes opportunities to do something different. I think that, people are moving. You've got a lot of people leaving the US to other places that don't have healthcare tied to their employment status. And so you do see a lot of really interesting things where people are making choices, even to live in lower cost areas, so that they can afford, healthcare and some other things. So people are making different choices as they rethink what it means to, have a profession or have a career and have a life as well.
Yes, the so-called digital nomads. Spain, Portugal, and other countries are famous for trying to get those people to our countries, no? Where you have a better quality of life at the end of the day.
That is, I've been trying to convince my wife and children to move to Portugal.
Really?
It's not going so well. I'm still here in Seattle.
Paul, going back to your newsletter, where you actually have over 100,000 subscribers, as Tora mentioned at the beginning. I read your newsletter this morning, and actually you always say on the newsletter, I believe that every organization in every industry needs a freelancer strategy, and not having one is like missing the internet trend in 1990 or the mobile revolution in 2010. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I spent 14 years at Microsoft, and so had a front row seat to strategies that missed, and I'll speak specifically to the mobile revolution. And I think Microsoft is actually coming around and doing very well with their new mobile strategy. Uh, but when I look at the freelance revolution and the idea that people are moving to the cloud and algorithms are being put to bear on matching people and scheduling and all sorts of things. You're starting to see it in every industry. I think I mentioned earlier, look at telemedicine. It wasn't that long
Right,
ago that you wouldn't even think that there would be freelance doctors, much less a freelance doctor on an iPhone app, right?
right.
I published in the newsletter this morning about a number of the legal platforms that are coming out where you can get a lawyer on demand. And so I don't think that there's a single industry that's not going to be impacted or innovation will not occur inside that industry based on this trend of the gig economy. I think when you're talking about human capital, which is the largest spend for a number of industries, um, you have to be thinking about it. And if not, I believe they're going to be disrupted, or innovative companies will come about and then be acquired by more legacy companies.
Right, you are also so much more competitive if you rely on freelancers, on-demand workers, however you want to call them. And you also have much more flexibility, no? So there are so many things that come in the package that it's absurd not to try it.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. I think one of the reasons I wrote the book was because it does take a different way of thinking. It's not as
Right,
easy as, and this is coming, I've spent um, tons of money hiring and working with freelancers, and it hasn't all been perfect. And so I think when you step into this new way of working with freelancers, especially when they don't have the same business context or maybe cultural context, it is a different way of working. And
it
so I
is.
think people try to step into the freelance world and expect it to work just like their employees may work with them at the company, and it's different. And so um, that's why I wrote the book and publish what I publish, is to help people understand how to make that transition.
Great. So we just recommend to anyone listening to the podcast to have a look at the book, Geek Mindset. We are sure there are plenty of tips that you can find there. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Outwise Insights. If you want to hire freelancers or find your next project, head over to outwise.com. See you next time.